I watched through my security monitors as 3 HOA board members walked straight past my locked gate and headed for my heated shed at 6 in the morning. And I knew this wasn't going to end well. My name is Oliver Stanton, and I've lived in Pinewood Estates in Boise, Idaho, for the past 4 years. The neighborhood is one of those cookie-cutter developments where every house looks basically the same, except mine has something special that nobody knew about. My shed wasn't just a shed. It was the nerve center of my entire property security system, climate control hub, and backup power station. The heating system inside kept the electronics at optimal temperature year-round, and the whole setup had cost me over $40,000 to install properly. I grabbed my phone and rushed outside, still wearing my pajama pants and a wrinkled t-shirt. The morning air was cold enough to see my breath, typical for early March in Idaho. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" I called out as I jogged across my lawn. The woman leading the group turned around with that particular expression I'd come to recognize over the years. Her name was Patricia Thornwell, and she was the HOA president. Mid-40s, always wearing business casual clothes even on weekends, and she had that haircut that practically screamed, "I want to speak to the manager." "Mr. Stanton, good morning," Patricia said in that fake pleasant tone that set my teeth on edge. "We sent you 3 emails about this." "About what? I never got any emails about you coming onto my property." She pulled out her phone and made a show of scrolling through it. "According to our records, we notified you 2 weeks ago that the HOA would be repurposing your shed for community storage. You didn't respond, which according to our bylaws constitutes acceptance." I stared at her. "That's not how any of this works. This is my property. You can't just take my shed." "Actually," said the man standing next to her, Gerald something, the treasurer, "according to Section 12.7 of the HOA covenant, any structure exceeding 100 square feet that isn't the primary residence can be designated for community use if the board votes unanimously." "That section doesn't exist," I said flatly. "I read the entire covenant before I bought this house." Patricia's smile got tighter. "We amended it last month at the board meeting. All homeowners were invited. I was in Portland for work last month. And even if you amended it, you can't just take people's property without compensation or proper notice." "We sent emails," Patricia repeated, like that settled everything. The third person in their group was a younger guy, maybe 30, holding a clipboard. He looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Maybe we should reschedule this," he suggested quietly. "Nonsense," Patricia said. "We have the locksmith coming in 20 minutes. Mr. Stanton, you have until then to remove any personal items from the shed. After that, it becomes HOA property." I felt my pulse hammering in my temples. "You're not getting into that shed. It's locked and it's staying locked." "Then we'll cut the lock," Patricia said simply. "The HOA covenant gives us the right to maintain community standards and facilities. This is all perfectly legal." It absolutely wasn't legal, but I could see she wasn't going to be reasoned with. I needed to buy time and get an actual lawyer involved. "Fine," I said, pulling out my phone. "Let me call my attorney real quick, just to make sure we're all on the same page about this being legal." Patricia's expression flickered for just a second. "That won't be necessary. We have HOA legal counsel who has already approved this action." "Then you won't mind if my lawyer confirms that." I dialed Marcus Chen, my buddy from college who'd gone into property law. It was 6:15 in the morning, but Marcus was an early riser who usually hit the gym before work. He picked up on the third ring. "Oliver, what's wrong?" "Hey, sorry for the early call. I've got HOA people on my property right now trying to seize my shed for community storage. They're saying some amended covenant gives them the right to do this." I heard rustling on the other end. "They're there right now. Don't let them touch anything. I'm serious. This is completely illegal. Even if they amended the covenant, they can't take private property without going through proper legal channels. That's basic property law." "You're on speaker," I said. "The HOA president is right here." "Good. Madam, this is Marcus Chen, attorney at law. What you're attempting to do constitutes theft and trespassing. If you proceed, Mr. Stanton has grounds for civil litigation and criminal charges. I strongly advise you to leave his property immediately." Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of red. "We have our own legal counsel who says this is perfectly within our rights." "Then have your counsel call me," Marcus said. "Oliver, I'm texting you my office number. Madam, I'll expect a call within the hour or I'll be filing an emergency injunction. Have a good morning." He hung up. I looked at Patricia, whose fake smile had completely vanished. "I think you should leave," I said. "We'll be back with proper authorization," Patricia said coldly. "And for your information, you're in violation of at least 6 other HOA regulations. I'll be sending you citations for all of them." She turned and marched back toward the front of my property, Gerald and the clipboard guy following. I watched them go, my heart still racing. I went back inside and made coffee because I definitely wasn't going back to sleep now. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Dude, what have you gotten yourself into? These HOA people sound crazy. Come by my office at 9. We need to talk strategy." I texted back a thanks and sat down at my kitchen table, looking out at the shed through the window. From the outside, it looked like a normal oversized shed, maybe 12 by 16 feet, painted the same neutral beige as my house. Nobody would guess what was inside. When I'd bought the house, one of my main concerns was security. I work from home as a cybersecurity consultant, and I have servers and equipment worth over $250,000 in my home office. I designed a comprehensive security system that included 23 cameras covering every angle of my property, motion sensors, thermal imaging, and a backup power system that could keep everything running for up to 72 hours if the main power went out. The shed housed the main server rack, the backup generator, the battery bank, the heating and cooling system for all the electronics, and the primary router for the entire network. If someone unplugged or moved that equipment without knowing what they were doing, my entire security system would crash. My house would be completely unprotected, my work servers would go offline, and I'd lose contracts I'd spent years building. I'd installed extra heating in the shed specifically because Idaho winters get brutal, and electronics need to stay within certain temperature ranges to function properly. The heated shed wasn't just a luxury. It was a necessity. My phone rang. It was my neighbor, Tom Richardson, who lived 2 houses down. "Oliver, I just saw Patricia and her goon squad leaving your place. What happened?" "They tried to seize my shed for community storage, said they amended the HOA covenant." Tom swore. "They pulled the same thing on the Johnsons last year with their gazebo, tried to turn it into a community sitting area. The Johnsons eventually moved because fighting it was too expensive." "Well, I'm not moving," I said, "and I'm not letting them take my shed." "Good. Most of us are sick of Patricia and her power trips. Let me know if you need anything." I spent the next couple of hours documenting everything. I took photos and videos of my shed, checked the locks, reviewed my security footage from that morning, and went through my email thoroughly to confirm I'd never received any notification from the HOA about this. They'd claimed to send 3 emails, but there was nothing in my inbox, spam folder, or trash. At 9 sharp, I was sitting in Marcus's office in downtown Boise. He'd already had his paralegal pull up the Pinewood Estates HOA covenant and all registered amendments. "Okay, so here's the situation," Marcus said, sliding a printout across his desk. "The amendment they're referencing does exist. It was filed with the county last month." My stomach dropped. "So they can take my shed." "Hold on, I'm not done." "Yes, the amendment exists, but no, it doesn't give them the right to seize property. The amendment says that structures over 100 square feet may be subject to additional oversight and regulation. That's it. There's nothing in here about repurposing private property for community use." So Patricia just lied. Patricia interpreted the amendment in the most favorable way possible to the HOA, which is illegal and potentially fraudulent. But here's the bigger problem. This amendment itself might not be valid. He pulled up another document on his computer. Idaho law requires that HOA covenant amendments be approved by a majority vote of homeowners, not just the board. Did everyone in the neighborhood get to vote on this? I shook my head. I never saw any ballot or vote request. Exactly. So we have two issues. First, the amendment might be invalid because proper voting procedures weren't followed. Second, even if the amendment is valid, it doesn't say what Patricia claims it says. She's essentially committing fraud and attempting theft. So what do? Marcus leaned back in his chair. "We file for an emergency, temporary restraining order, preventing the HOA from accessing your property or your shed. Then, we file a lawsuit challenging the validity of the amendment and seeking damages for harassment and attempted theft. We also send a cease and desist letter to Patricia personally and to the HOA board. How much is this going to cost me? Let's start with the restraining order and cease and desist. Call it $2,000 upfront. If this goes to full litigation, we're looking at anywhere from $10,000 to $30,000 depending on how hard they fight. But honestly, once they get hit with actual legal documents, they usually back down. HOAs talk tough, but they fold when real lawyers get involved." I nodded. "Do it. All of it. I'll have the paperwork ready by end of business today. In the meantime, do not let anyone from the HOA onto your property for any reason. If they show up again, call the police and report them for trespassing." I left Marcus's office feeling slightly better but still angry about the whole situation. I'd moved to Pinewood Estates because it seemed like a quiet, normal neighborhood. The HOA had seemed reasonable when I'd first joined. Monthly dues were only $150, which covered landscaping of common areas and snow removal in winter. Patricia had been elected president about 2 years ago, and that's when things started getting weird. She'd started implementing more and more rules. No cars in driveways overnight. No decorations except during approved holiday periods. No exterior modifications without written approval, which could take months. No children's toys visible from the street. The list went on. I'd mostly ignored it because I kept to myself and didn't violate most of the rules anyway. But clearly, I'd ended up on Patricia's radar somehow. When I got home, there was a neon orange violation notice stuck to my front door. I pulled it down and read through it. According to Patricia, I was in violation of the following regulations. 1. Unapproved exterior structure, referring to my shed. 2. Excessive security cameras creating an unwelcoming atmosphere. 3. Lawn height exceeding 2 1/2 inches in the front yard. 4. Non-standard mailbox color. 5. Unauthorized satellite dish. 6. Vehicle parked in driveway overnight, specifically noting my work truck. Each violation came with a $100 fine, for a total of $600, due within 30 days. I took photos of the notice and immediately emailed them to Marcus. Then I went around my property checking each supposed violation. My shed was fully compliant with county building codes and had been there when I bought the house. My security cameras were small and unobtrusive. I'd mowed my lawn 3 days ago and it was perfectly normal height. My mailbox was standard black, same as half the neighborhood. I didn't have a satellite dish. I had a TV antenna, which was completely legal, and my truck was parked in my own driveway on my own property. Every single violation was either false or unenforceable. I was starting to understand why the Johnsons had moved. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. It was a woman named Deborah, who identified herself as the HOA's legal counsel. She said she was calling to discuss the situation with my shed and asked me to return her call. I forwarded the voicemail to Marcus and asked him to handle all communication with the HOA from now on. Around 5 p.m., I saw Patricia's car pull up in front of my house again. This time she had 4 people with her, including a guy in a locksmith uniform. I grabbed my phone and immediately dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? There are people attempting to break into a structure on my property. I've asked them to leave, and they are refusing. The dispatcher took my information and said officers were on the way. I went outside and stood between Patricia's group and my shed. I told you this morning you're not touching my shed. We have legal authority, Patricia said, holding up a piece of paper. This is a board resolution authorizing us to take possession of the structure. A board resolution isn't a legal document. You need a court order. My attorney has already explained this to your counsel. Your attorney is wrong. Then you can explain that to the police. They're on their way. Patricia's confident expression faltered. You called the police. You're trespassing on my property and attempting to break into my structure. Yes, I called the police. The locksmith was already backing toward his van. Look, lady, I don't want any part of this if the cops are coming. I'm not getting involved in some property dispute. He drove off, leaving Patricia and her 3 board members standing in my yard. 2 Boise police officers arrived about 5 minutes later. Someone called about a trespassing situation. The older officer said. That would be me, I said. These people are from my HOA and they're trying to force their way into my shed without legal authority. We have authorization from the board, Patricia insisted, showing the officers her paper. The officer looked at it briefly. Madam, this is just an internal HOA document. This doesn't give you the legal right to access someone else's property without their permission. The HOA covenant gives us oversight of all structures. That's a civil matter, the officer said, but what's happening right now is trespassing. The homeowner has asked you to leave. If you don't leave, I can arrest you. Gerald and the other 2 board members were already walking away. Patricia stood her ground for another moment, then finally turned and left without another word. You might want to consider getting a restraining order, the younger officer suggested. If this is an ongoing harassment situation, document everything. My attorney is already working on it, I said, after the police left. I went back inside and checked all my security footage. Every camera was working perfectly, and I had crystal clear video of the entire incident, including Patricia's attempt to have the locksmith break my lock. Marcus called me that evening. I got your email about the violation notice. This is good for us, actually. It shows a pattern of harassment. The violations are clearly frivolous and retaliatory. We're going to include all of this in our filing. When will the restraining order be ready? I'm filing it first thing tomorrow morning. We should have a hearing within a week. In the meantime, seriously, don't engage with these people at all. Let me handle everything. Trust me, I'm happy to. The next few days were tense but quiet. I didn't see Patricia or any other board members. though I noticed cars slowing down in front of my house more often than usual, probably neighbors gossiping about the police showing up. Tom called me a couple of times to check in and let me know that word had spread about what happened. Apparently, a lot of people in the neighborhood were privately rooting for me but were too scared of Patricia to say anything publicly. She's threatened to fine half the neighborhood into bankruptcy, Tom told me. Everyone's afraid that if they speak up, they'll be next. Has anyone tried to vote her out? We tried last year. She controls the ballot process, though, so somehow she always wins. It's complete garbage. That has to be illegal. Probably, but who has the money to fight it? That was the real problem. Patricia had figured out that most people couldn't afford to hire lawyers for what seemed like minor disputes. She'd created a system where she had almost unlimited power because challenging her was too expensive for the average homeowner. But I wasn't the average homeowner. I had both the money and the sheer stubbornness to see this through. The hearing for the temporary restraining order was scheduled for the following Monday. Marcus told me I didn't need to attend, but I wanted to be there. The courthouse in downtown Boise was busy on Monday morning. Marcus met me outside, carrying a leather briefcase stuffed with documents. "Ready?" he asked. "Let's do this." We went through security and found the correct courtroom. Patricia was already there with her attorney, a tired-looking man in his 60s who kept checking his watch. The judge, a woman named Carol Henderson, called our case first thing. Marcus presented our petition for a temporary restraining order, outlining the HOA's attempts to seize my property, the trespassing incidents, and the retaliatory violation notices. Patricia's attorney argued that the HOA had legitimate authority under the covenant, and that I was being unreasonable about allowing the shed to be used for community purposes. Judge Henderson read through the covenant amendment carefully, then looked up at Patricia's attorney. "Counselor, I'm reading this amendment, and I don't see anything in here that authorizes the HOA to seize private property." "Where exactly does it say that?" The attorney flipped through his papers. "Your Honor, the amendment grants oversight authority for structures over 100 square feet. Oversight isn't ownership. Oversight means inspection and regulation, not confiscation. Is there any language in this amendment about taking possession of homeowner property?" The board interpreted the amendment to include that authority. The board doesn't get to interpret their own amendments in whatever way suits them. That's not how property law works. Judge Henderson looked at Patricia directly. "Madam, did you actually believe you had the legal right to take this man's shed?" Patricia stood up. "Your Honor, we're just trying to maintain community standards and provide amenities for all residents. By stealing someone's personal property, it's not stealing. The covenant gives us rights." "No, it doesn't." Judge Henderson signed a document. "I'm granting the temporary restraining order. The HOA and all board members are prohibited from accessing Mr. Stanton's property or his shed without his explicit written permission. Furthermore, all fines related to the violations cited in the notice dated March 8th are suspended pending resolution of this matter. We'll schedule a full hearing in 60 days to address the validity of the covenant amendment itself." Marcus was grinning as we left the courtroom. That went about as well as possible. "She actually believed she could just take my shed," I said, still amazed at the audacity. People like Patricia live in their own reality where they are always right. The problem is, most people let them get away with it because fighting back is too hard. I went home feeling vindicated but also exhausted. This whole situation had taken up so much mental energy over the past week. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something wrong immediately. My front door was slightly ajar. I hadn't left it open. I was obsessive about locking doors. I stayed in my truck and called 911 for the second time in a week. The dispatcher advised me not to go inside until officers arrived. 2 police cars showed up within minutes. The officers cleared my house while I waited outside, then gave me the all clear. "Whoever was here is gone now," the older officer from the previous incident said. "But you're going to want to look around and see if anything is missing." I went inside carefully. My living room looked normal. Kitchen was fine. Home office was intact, all my equipment still there. But when I checked my security system control panel in the hallway closet, I saw that someone had tried to disable it. The main power had been cut, but the system had automatically switched to battery backup, so all the cameras had kept recording. I pulled up the footage on my phone. At 10:15 that morning, while I was in court, a man I'd never seen before had picked my front door lock and entered my house. He'd gone straight to the security panel like he knew exactly where it was, tried to disable it, then spent about 15 minutes walking through my house. He'd taken photos of various rooms with his phone, then left. "I've got video of the break-in," I told the officers. We watched the footage together. The intruder was a white male, maybe 45, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He didn't try to hide his face because he clearly thought he'd disabled the cameras. "You recognize him?" the younger officer asked. "Never seen him before in my life." "We'll need a copy of this footage for our investigation. This is clear breaking and entering. We'll try to identify him and press charges." After the police left, I called Marcus and told him what happened. "You need to check your shed right now," he said immediately. I went outside and inspected the shed. The lock was intact and everything inside was undisturbed. The equipment was still running perfectly. "Everything's fine," I told Marcus. "This has to be related to the HOA situation. The timing is too convenient. Someone breaks into your house the same morning we're in court getting a restraining order. You think Patricia sent someone?" "I think it's possible. Can you send me that security footage? I'm going to have my investigator look into it." I sent him the files and spent the rest of the day checking and rechecking my security system. Nothing was missing from my house, which was weird. Why break in and not steal anything? Unless the goal wasn't theft. Unless someone was looking for something specific or trying to gather information. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept running through everything that had happened, trying to make sense of it. Patricia had been so confident that she could take my shed. Even after I'd pushed back, even after Marcus had gotten involved, she'd still tried to force the issue. Why was she so fixated on my shed specifically? There were other sheds in the neighborhood. Bigger ones, even. Why mine? I got up and made coffee at 2 in the morning, then pulled up the property records for Pinewood Estates. I'd done basic research when I'd bought the house, but I'd never dug deep into the HOA's history. Patricia had been elected president 26 months ago. Before that, the president had been a guy named Richard Martinez, who'd served for 6 years. I managed to find Richard's contact information through a property search site and made a note to call him in the morning. The HOA's financial records were public, sort of. They filed basic reports with the county, but the details were sparse. What I could see was that the HOA's reserves had been steadily declining since Patricia took over. 2 years ago, they'd had almost $200,000 in reserve funds. Now they had less than $30,000. Where had the money gone? I dug deeper and found records of various improvements and maintenance projects. New landscaping for the common areas, upgraded signage, a community website redesign. All told, Patricia had authorized spending over $150,000 in less than 2 years. For a small HOA managing a neighborhood of only 80 houses, that was insane. The next morning, I called Richard Martinez. He answered on the second ring, and when I explained who I was and what was happening, he let out a long sigh. Patricia is trying to seize your shed. That's a new low, even for her. You don't sound surprised. Nothing Patricia does surprises me anymore. Look, I was HOA president for 6 years, and we ran things conservatively. We maintained the common areas, kept costs down, and didn't bother people unless there was a real problem. Then Patricia got elected, and within 6 months, she'd turned the HOA into her personal fiefdom. What happened to all the money in reserves? Good question. I've been wondering that myself. She spent a fortune on landscaping upgrades we didn't need, hired her brother-in-law's company to repaint the neighborhood entrance sign for 20 grand when it didn't need painting, and authorized all sorts of consulting fees that seemed questionable. Is that legal? It's legal if the board approves it, and Patricia stacked the board with her friends. Gerald, the treasurer, is her cousin. The secretary is her college roommate. She's got complete control. Can't the homeowners vote her out? We tried last year. She disqualified half the candidates on technicalities, then ran an election that was basically rigged. Several of us filed complaints with the county, but HOA internal politics aren't really something the government intervenes in unless there's clear fraud. I think there might be clear fraud, I said. She tried to seize my shed based on a covenant amendment that doesn't say what she claims it says. She's issued bogus violation fines. And yesterday, while I was in court getting a restraining order against her, someone broke into my house. Richard was quiet for a moment. You think she sent someone to break into your house? The timing is suspicious. Oliver, be careful. I don't want to sound paranoid, but Patricia has done some genuinely crazy things. Last year, she tried to have the Johnsons arrested for assault because Mrs. Johnson bumped into her at the grocery store. She filed a police report and everything. The charges were dropped, but it was a nightmare for the Johnsons. Why does she want my shed so badly? I don't know, but if I had to guess, it's because you stood up to her. Patricia can't handle anyone saying no. She takes it as a personal attack. After I hung up with Richard, I felt even more uneasy about the whole situation. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA president. This was someone with control issues and potentially serious ethical problems. Marcus called me around noon. My investigator identified your break-in guy. His name is Dennis Foster. He's a private investigator out of Meridian. Someone hired a PI to break into my house. Looks that way. The police are bringing him in for questioning. Breaking and entering is a felony, so he's facing serious charges unless he cooperates and tells them who hired him. It has to be Patricia. Probably, but we need proof. Let me handle this, okay? If she did hire him, she's just bought herself criminal charges on top of the civil lawsuit. That evening, Tom came over with a 6-pack of beer and an update on the neighborhood gossip. Everyone's talking about the police showing up at your place again, he said as we sat on my back patio. Patricia is telling people you're unstable and causing problems for the community. Of course she is. But here's the interesting part. A bunch of us got together last night, about 15 homeowners, and we're organizing a vote of no confidence. We think we have enough support to force a special election and remove Patricia from the board. Richard Martinez told me you guys tried that last year. This time is different. This time we're going to get the county involved from the start, make sure everything is done properly. Patricia can't disqualify candidates if we follow proper legal procedures. What can I do to help? Keep fighting your legal battle. Every day that Patricia spends dealing with your lawsuit is a day she's not consolidating power. And honestly, you're inspiring people. If you can stand up to her, maybe we can too. The next few weeks were relatively quiet. The restraining order was in effect, so Patricia couldn't come near my property. I'd changed all my locks after the break-in and added additional security measures. Dennis Foster, the PI who'd broken in, had been arrested and charged with burglary. According to Marcus, he was negotiating a plea deal in exchange for testifying about who had hired him. I focused on my work and tried to return to normal life as much as possible. But I kept thinking about those missing HOA funds. Something didn't add up. I started attending HOA meetings, which were held the first Tuesday of every month at the community center. Patricia ran the meetings like a dictator, using parliamentary procedure to shut down any questions or discussion she didn't like. When someone asked about the reserve fund balance, she said it was all properly allocated and moved on before anyone could follow up. After one meeting, a woman named Veronica Walsh approached me in the parking lot. She was probably in her early 30s, with a no-nonsense attitude. "You're Oliver Stanton, right? The guy suing the HOA." "That's me." "Good. Someone needs to hold Patricia accountable. I'm an accountant and I've been trying to get access to the HOA's detailed financial records for months. Patricia keeps blocking me, saying I don't have standing to review them." "Can she do that?" "No. Under Idaho HOA law, any homeowner can request to review the financial records. But she's been stonewalling me, and I don't have the money to hire a lawyer to force the issue." "What if my lawyer requested them as part of my lawsuit?" Veronica's eyes lit up. "That could work. If you're suing the HOA, your attorney has the right to discovery, which includes financial records." I called Marcus from the parking lot and explained the situation. He agreed it was a good idea and said he'd file a motion for discovery requesting the last 3 years of detailed financial records. "If there's financial impropriety happening, we can potentially add that to our lawsuit," Marcus said. "And if it's bad enough, we might be talking about criminal charges." The motion for discovery was filed the next day. Patricia's attorney tried to fight it, but the judge wasn't having it. She ordered the HOA to produce all financial records within 14 days. When the records arrived, Marcus and I met with Veronica at his office to go through them. It took us 6 hours, but what we found was damning. Patricia had been systematically siphoning money from the HOA for 2 years. The landscaping company she'd hired for upgrades was owned by her brother. The consulting fees had gone to a company that didn't seem to actually exist, but had the same address as Patricia's house. The sign painting project had been billed at $20,000, but Veronica found the actual invoice from the painting company showing they'd been paid $4,000. Someone had pocketed the difference. "This is embezzlement," Veronica said, spreading out printouts across the conference table. "This is textbook fraud. She's stolen over $130,000 from the HOA." Marcus was already pulling up Idaho criminal codes on his computer. "This is felony theft. We need to take this to the police and the county prosecutor." "What about the lawsuit?" I asked. "The civil suit continues, but this is now a criminal matter. Patricia is going to jail." We compiled all the evidence into a comprehensive report and took it to the Boise Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit the next day. The detective who met with us, a sharp-eyed woman named Detective Sarah Kim, reviewed everything carefully. "This is good work," she said. "Really good. You've basically done half my investigation for me. I'm going to open a case and bring this to the prosecutor. With evidence this clear, I expect we'll have enough for an arrest warrant within a few days." "What happens to the HOA in the meantime?" I asked. "That's a civil matter." "But if the president gets arrested for embezzling HOA funds, I imagine the homeowners will remove her pretty quickly." True to her word, Detective Kim moved fast. 4 days later, on a Tuesday afternoon, I watched from my window as 2 police cars pulled up to Patricia's house 3 doors down. They knocked on her door, and when she answered, they arrested her right there on her front porch. The neighborhood grapevine went into overdrive. By that evening, everyone knew Patricia had been arrested for embezzlement. The vice president, Gerald, called an emergency board meeting for the next night. Tom and I attended along with about 60 other homeowners, which was more than had ever shown up for a regular meeting. Gerald looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "As you all know, Patricia was arrested yesterday," he said quietly. "I don't have all the details, but the charges are serious. The board is going to meet in closed session to discuss next steps." "No closed session," someone called out. "We have a right to know what's going on." "The board needs to discuss legal strategy." "You mean you need to figure out how to cover up your own involvement," Veronica said, standing up. "You're the treasurer, Gerald. You approved all those fraudulent payments. Either you were in on the embezzlement or you were grossly negligent. Either way, you need to resign." Gerald's face turned red. "I had no idea Patricia was stealing money. She provided documentation for everything." "Fake documentation. You never verified any of it. That's your job as treasurer." The meeting descended into chaos, with people shouting questions and accusations. Eventually, Gerald and the other 2 board members walked out, leaving the homeowners to organize themselves. Richard Martinez stood up and managed to quiet everyone down. "Okay, here's what we do. We hold a vote right now to dissolve the current board and elect an interim board to serve until we can hold proper elections. All in favor?" The vote was unanimous. Within an hour, we'd elected Richard as interim president, Veronica as interim treasurer, and 3 other respected long-time residents as the other board members. The next morning, the new board met with the HOA's attorney and terminated his services, then hired a new law firm that specialized in HOA governance. They also hired a forensic accountant to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances. Marcus and I continued with our civil lawsuit because I still had damages from Patricia's harassment and attempted theft of my shed. But the criminal case was moving forward quickly. Patricia's arraignment was set for 2 weeks after her arrest. She'd been released on bail but had to surrender her passport and was confined to Ada County. The prosecutor charged her with 3 counts of felony theft, 1 count of forgery, and 1 count of fraud. If convicted on all counts, she was looking at up to 15 years in prison. Dennis Foster, the PI who'd broken into my house, had taken a plea deal and testified that Patricia had hired him to search my house for information she could use against me in the HOA dispute. He'd been specifically instructed to find documentation about my shed and security system. That explained why he'd taken photos but not stolen anything. He'd been gathering intelligence, not committing a simple burglary. With Foster's testimony, the prosecutor added charges of conspiracy to commit burglary and hiring someone to commit a crime. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested. The evidence was too strong, and the crimes were too egregious. The trial was set for 6 months out, but I didn't have to wait that long for resolution on my civil case. With Patricia facing criminal charges and the HOA under new management, the new board voted to settle with me immediately. Marcus negotiated a settlement that included a formal apology, payment of all my legal fees, dismissal of all bogus violation fines, and $25,000 in damages for harassment and emotional distress. The new board also formally rescinded the covenant amendment that Patricia had pushed through without proper homeowner approval. We're cleaning up a lot of Patricia's messes. Richard told me after the settlement was finalized. The covenant amendment wasn't the only thing she did improperly. We're going to have to spend the next year undoing 2 years of her governance. What about the missing money? The forensic audit found that Patricia stole about $140,000 total. Her house is in foreclosure, so we might recover $30,000 or $40,000 from that, and she had some savings we can go after. But realistically, the HOA has lost about $100,000 permanently. We're going to have a special assessment to rebuild the reserves. That's not ideal, but it's better than having a criminal running the HOA. Agreed. Patricia's trial happened in September, right as Idaho was transitioning into fall. I attended as a witness since the break-in at my house was part of the charges. The trial lasted a week, and the prosecution methodically laid out the evidence of Patricia's embezzlement, fraud, and the hired break-in. Patricia's defense was weak. Her lawyer tried to argue that she genuinely believed she was making good business decisions for the HOA, and that any financial irregularities were accidents, not intentional theft. But the paper trail was too clear. She'd set up fake companies, forged invoices, and funneled HOA money into her personal accounts for 2 years. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. At sentencing, Patricia showed no remorse. She gave a rambling statement about how she'd only been trying to improve the neighborhood and how she was being persecuted for being a strong leader. The judge wasn't impressed. Miss Thornwell, you were entrusted with the financial well-being of your community, and you betrayed that trust for personal gain. You stole from your neighbors, you harassed homeowners who questioned you, and you even hired someone to break into a homeowner's residence. Your actions weren't those of a leader. They were those of a thief and a bully. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 4. She was also ordered to pay full restitution of $140,000 plus interest. Patricia was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. I felt a strange mix of emotions watching her go. I was glad she was being held accountable, but it was also sad that it had come to this. If she just accepted no as an answer about my shed, none of this would have been discovered. Gerald, the treasurer, was charged with negligence in his duties, but not criminal embezzlement. The new board voted to ban him from ever serving on the HOA board again, and he ended up selling his house and moving out of Pinewood Estates entirely. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board was transparent and reasonable. They held regular meetings, published detailed financial reports, and actually listened to homeowner concerns. Dues stayed the same, and the special assessment to rebuild reserves was spread out over 5 years to minimize the impact. My shed remained exactly where it was, continuing to power my security system and keep my entire property protected. I'd added even more cameras after the break-in, and now I had complete coverage of every angle, every entry point, and every approach to my house. Tom and I became good friends through the whole ordeal. We started having regular barbecues, and I got to know more of my neighbors. People felt comfortable speaking up now that Patricia was gone, and the neighborhood actually became a community instead of a dictatorship. Veronica joined the permanent HOA board in the next election and became treasurer officially. She implemented proper financial controls and oversight so that what happened with Patricia could never happen again. Marcus and I stayed in touch too. He sent me a nice bottle of whiskey after the trial with a note that said, "Thanks for the most interesting case of my year." About a year after everything settled down, I was working in my home office when I got an email from the Idaho Department of Corrections. Patricia had tried to file some kind of appeal or complaint about me from prison, but the department was rejecting it and wanted to let me know in case she tried to contact me in other ways. I showed the email to Marcus, who laughed. "Even in prison, she can't let it go. Don't worry about it. She has no legal standing to do anything to you, and if she harasses you from prison, she'll just add time to her sentence." I deleted the email and went back to work. Patricia Thornwell had taken up enough of my mental energy. She was in prison where she belonged, my property was secure, and my life had moved on. Sometimes at night, when I'm reviewing my security footage before bed, I think about how all of this started because Patricia wanted my heated shed for community storage. She had no idea that the shed wasn't just a storage space. It was the brain of my entire security operation, keeping thousands of dollars of equipment running and protecting my property. If she'd just asked nicely, I might have explained that to her. I might have offered to help the HOA find alternative storage solutions. But she didn't ask. She demanded, she threatened, and she tried to steal. And in doing so, she set off a chain of events that exposed her crimes and ended with her in prison. The shed still sits in my backyard, climate-controlled and secure, housing the servers and equipment that power my security grid. The cameras still record everything. The motion sensors still alert me to any unusual activity. And every month, like clockwork, I pay my HOA dues to a board that actually respects property rights and follows the law. My security system captured everything that happened during those chaotic months. The attempted break-in at my shed, Patricia's angry confrontations, the police arrivals, even the day she was arrested. I backed up all that footage and stored it securely. Not because I ever want to watch it again, but because it's a reminder of why standing up to bullies matters. Sometimes people ask me if I regret buying a house in an HOA neighborhood. The answer is no. HOAs aren't inherently bad. They can provide valuable services and help maintain property values when run properly. The problem isn't the concept of an HOA. The problem is when people like Patricia get into power and abuse it. The key is vigilance. Homeowners need to pay attention to who's running their HOA, how money is being spent, and whether rules are being applied fairly. And when something doesn't seem right, people need to speak up and take action, even if it's uncomfortable or expensive in the short term. I spent about $12,000 total on legal fees fighting Patricia, and I got most of that back in the settlement. But even if I hadn't, it would have been worth it to stop her from stealing my property and to expose her crimes. The neighborhood is better now. Property values have actually increased since Patricia was removed because word got out that Pinewood Estates cleaned house and implemented proper governance. People want to live in a community that's well managed and fair. My heated shed continues to hum quietly in my backyard, maintaining the perfect temperature for my electronics, powering my cameras and sensors, and keeping my property secure. It's just a shed to most people, but to me, it represents something more. It represents the principle that your property rights matter, that standing up to bullies is worth it, and that sometimes the thing someone wants to take from you is more important than they could ever understand. Patricia thought she could seize my shed for community storage. She didn't know it powered my entire security grid. And by the time she realized what she'd gotten herself into, it was too late. The cameras had captured everything, the evidence had piled up, and justice was inevitable. I still live in Pinewood Estates, still work from home, and still maintain my comprehensive security system. But now, I also serve on the Architectural Review Committee for the HOA because I want to make sure that proper procedures are followed and that no homeowner ever has to go through what I went through. Life is good. My shed is secure. My cameras are running. And Patricia Thornwell is in prison, exactly where she belongs for stealing from her neighbors and trying to take what wasn't hers. The system worked, justice prevailed, and I got to keep my heated shed that nobody understood was so much more than just storage space. It was the nerve center of my property, and I'd protected it. That's all that matters in the end.